Some people say that when you lose your life partner, part of you dies too. For Harold Thompson, those words had never felt more true than during the lonely months since Margaret's funeral. The 72-year-old had been ignoring the pain in his foot for weeks, the same way he'd been ignoring everything else that required attention. When he finally walked into the small-town clinic, he just wanted someone to tell him it was nothing serious. Anna, the nurse who remembered caring for his wife, knelt down to examine his foot. As she carefully removed his sock, what she found underneath made her face go white. It wasn't just the infection that shocked her, but what else could be hidden there that would change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through dust-laden curtains in Harold Thompson's farmhouse kitchen, casting long shadows across a table set for one. The same chip blue mug sat in the same spot it had occupied for the past 8 months, filled with coffee that had grown cold, while Harold stared out the window at Margaret's garden. Weeds had long since claimed the neat rows of tomatoes and peppers she'd tended with such care, and the sight of it made his chest tighten with a familiar ache. Harold pushed himself up from the wooden chair, wincing as his left foot protested the movement. The pain had been getting worse for weeks now, but acknowledging it felt like admitting defeat. Margaret would have marched him to the clinic by now, would have sat him down with that no-nonsense look of hers and made him face facts. But Margaret wasn't here anymore, and Harold had grown accustomed to ignoring the things that needed attention. He shuffled to the kitchen counter where Margaret's recipe box sat undisturbed, its weathered wood surface gathering dust. The brass latch had tarnished, and Harold couldn't remember the last time he'd seen it opened. Inside were hundreds of handwritten cards in Margaret's careful script Sunday pot roast, her famous apple pie, the chocolate chip cookies their grandchildren begged for every Christmas. He tried to open it once, about a month after the funeral, but the sight of her handwriting had sent him stumbling out to the porch where he wept until his ribs ached. Now he simply walked past it, the way he walked past so many reminders of the life they'd shared. 45 years of marriage reduced to artifacts he couldn't bear to touch. The pain in his foot flared as he made his way to the front porch, and Harold gritted his teeth against it. He'd been a soldier once, had served 2 tours in Vietnam, and come home with shrapnel in his shoulder and stories he'd never told anyone except Margaret. Pain was something you endured, not something you complained about, but this was different. A deep, throbbing ache that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat and made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. From his porch chair, Harold could see Tom Henderson working in his adjacent cornfield, the familiar figure bent over his equipment. Tom had been trying to engage him in conversation for months, bringing over casseroles from his wife Linda and lingering at the property line with offers to help with chores. Harold appreciated the kindness, but accepting it felt like admitting he couldn't manage on his own anymore. The Hendersons had been at Margaret's funeral, of course. The whole town had turned out, filling the little Methodist church until people were standing in the back. Margaret had taught 3rd grade for 30 years and had touched countless lives in their small community of Millfield. Harold had sat in the front pew, overwhelmed by the sea of faces and the constant stream of memories people shared about his wife. "She was like a second mother to my Danny," one woman had whispered, pressing his hand. "Always stayed after school to help him with his reading. Remember how she organized those Christmas programs?" another had said. "Made every child feel like a star." Harold remembered, of course. He remembered everything about Margaret. The way she hummed while she cooked, how she'd save articles from the newspaper that she thought would interest him, the gentle way she'd wake him when his Vietnam nightmares made him thrash in his sleep. But remembering hurt too much now, so he'd begun the gradual process of pushing those memories away, along with the people who wanted to share them. 3 miles away, at Millfield Clinic, Ana Rodriguez was preparing for another busy day. She'd been the head nurse for 12 years, ever since moving to town as a single mother with her infant son Miguel. The clinic served 3 small communities, and Ana knew most of her patients by name, knew their families and their stories, and the particular ways they dealt with illness and fear. She'd grown up in a large, extended family where caregiving was considered both an honor and a responsibility. Her grandmother had been a curandera, a healer who combined traditional medicine with an intuitive understanding of how emotional pain manifested in the body. Ana had learned to read the signs, the way grief could settle into someone's shoulders, how loneliness could make a person's voice grow thin and uncertain. This morning, she was thinking about Harold Thompson as she organized the day's appointments. She'd cared for Margaret during those final months, had watched Harold's devotion as he rarely left his wife's side. Even when Margaret slept, Harold would sit in the bedside chair, holding her hand and speaking to her in the low, gentle tones reserved for lovers who'd shared a lifetime together. Ana had seen many couples face terminal illness, but the Thompsons' bond had been something special. Margaret had worried constantly about Harold, had made Ana promise to check on him after she was gone. That promise had been weighing on Anna's mind for months, especially since Harold had stopped coming to town regularly, and Tom Henderson had mentioned his concerns about his neighbor's isolation. Dr. Peterson knocked on the door of Anna's office, interrupting her thoughts. David Peterson had been Millfield's only doctor for 20 years. A gentleman in his 60s who'd chosen small-town practice because he believed in knowing his patients as people, not just collections of symptoms. "Morning, Ana," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I've been thinking we should reach out to Harold Thompson. Tom Henderson called yesterday, said he's worried about him. Apparently, Harold's been limping pretty badly but refuses help." Ana nodded, not surprised by the news. "Margaret made me promise to look after him. I've been meaning to drive out there, but he's made it clear he wants to be left alone. Sometimes what people want and what they need are different things," Dr. Peterson said, "especially when they're grieving. Harold's always been proud, independent. Margaret used to joke that getting him to admit he had a cold was like pulling teeth. She also said he'd been having foot problems for years," Ana remembered. Something about old combat injuries that flared up when the weather changed. If he's limping badly enough for Tom to notice from across the field, it might be serious. Dr. Peterson stood, straightening his white coat. "Well, we can't force him to come in, but we can make sure he knows he's welcome here. And if you do decide to check on him, take my card. Sometimes a house call is worth 10 appointments that never happen." Ana spent the rest of the morning seeing patients Mrs. Garcia with her diabetes follow-up, young Billy Chun for his school, physical, elderly Mr. Foster, who came in monthly more for company than medical care. Each interaction reminded her of why she'd chosen nursing, how healing happened not just through medication and procedures, but through connection, through seeing people fully and helping them feel less alone with their struggles. It was nearly noon when she heard the clinic's front door open with its familiar chime, followed by slow, uneven footsteps across the waiting room floor. Ana looked up from her charts to see Harold Thompson standing uncertainly by the reception desk, his weathered face drawn with pain and something that looked like defeat. He wore the same clothes he'd worn to Margaret's funeral, a navy button-down shirt and khaki pants that now hung loose on his diminished frame. His gray hair, once neatly combed, looked unkempt, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. But it was his posture that struck Ana most, the way he favored his left foot, the careful way he held himself as if movement might cause everything to fall apart. "Harold," she said, coming around the desk with a warm smile. "It's good to see you." He looked up, and for a moment his face brightened with recognition. "Ana, I am ... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I think I might need to see someone about my foot. It's been bothering me some. Anna could see from the way he gripped the reception counter that it was far more than some. But she'd learned long ago not to challenge a patient's initial description of their pain. People had their own ways of admitting vulnerability, and Harold Thompson was clearly a man who measured his words carefully. "Of course," she said. "Dr. Peterson is between appointments right now. Why don't we get you settled in exam room 2? As Harold followed her down the familiar hallway, Anna noticed how he tried to hide his limp, the way he paused at the doorway as if gathering strength for each step. The exam room had been Margaret's room during her treatments, and Anna wondered if Harold remembered, if being here brought back those difficult days when hope and fear had warred in equal measure. "Go ahead and have a seat up on the table," Anna said gently. "Dr. Peterson will be right in, but I'd like to take a look at that foot first, if that's all right." Harold nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he worked to remove his worn leather shoe. Anna noticed how he moved a careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to manage pain, the military precision that still showed in his posture despite his obvious discomfort. When the shoe finally came off, followed by a thick wool sock, Anna had to work to keep her expression neutral. Harold's foot was swollen and discolored, with angry red streaks that suggested a serious infection. But as she looked closer, something else caught her attention, a small bulge pressed against the inner arch of his foot, something that had been hidden beneath the sock. "Harold," she said carefully, "I need to see what you have tucked in here." His face flushed red, and for a moment he looked like he might bolt from the room. But then his shoulders sagged, and he nodded with resignation. Anna gently extracted what she found there, a small, faded photograph that had been pressed against his skin, held in place by the tight sock. The image showed a young Margaret, probably in her 20s, laughing at the camera with the kind of pure joy that made Anna's heart ache. Her dark hair was styled in the fashion of the early 70s, and she wore a simple sundress that Harold had probably complimented her on 50 years ago. The photo was soft around the edges from handling, and Anna could see where Harold's tears had stained the corners. Harold's breath came in short gasps as Anna held the photograph, and she realized this might be the first time in months that anyone had acknowledged the depth of his loss, the desperate lengths to which his loneliness had driven him. "She was beautiful," Anna said softly, handing the photo back to him. Harold's voice was barely a whisper when he replied, "I know it looks strange. I needed her close to me somehow. I can't sleep in our bed anymore. Can't go into her sewing room. But this little picture, it was like having a piece of her with me." Anna felt tears prick her own eyes as she understood the full scope of what she was seeing. This wasn't just a medical emergency, though the infection in Harold's foot was certainly serious. This was a man who'd been carrying his grief so literally, so physically, that he'd risked his health rather than let go of this one tangible connection to his wife. "Harold," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "we're going to take very good care of you. But first, we need to talk about this infection. And then, if you're willing, maybe we can talk about Margaret too." For the first time since entering the clinic, Harold met her eyes directly. In them, Anna saw not just pain and grief, but a flicker of something that might have been hope, or at least the possibility of hope, which was sometimes enough to begin healing. Harold clutched the photograph against his chest as Dr. Peterson entered the exam room, his kind eyes taking in the scene with practiced understanding. Anna had briefed him quickly in the hallway, and he could see immediately that they were dealing with far more than a simple foot complaint. "Harold, it's been too long," Dr. Peterson said, settling onto his rolling stool with the unhurried manner that had comforted countless patients over the years. "Anna tells me you've been having some trouble with that foot." Harold's grip on Margaret's photograph tightened. "It's probably nothing serious. Just thought I should have someone take a look." Anna exchanged a glance with Dr. Peterson. They both knew that Harold's definition of nothing serious likely bore little resemblance to medical reality. She'd seen the infection spreading up from his foot in angry red lines, a condition that could become life-threatening if left untreated much longer. "May I?" Dr. Peterson asked, gesturing toward Harold's foot. Harold nodded reluctantly, and the doctor began his examination with gentle, experienced hands. Anna watched Harold's face as Dr. Peterson probed the swollen tissue, noting how he clenched his jaw against what must have been considerable pain. The photograph never left his grasp, his knuckles white around its faded edges. "Harold," Dr. Peterson said, after several minutes of careful examination, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. This infection is quite advanced. The redness I'm seeing here, these streaks going up your leg, that's cellulitis, and it's spreading toward your bloodstream. If we don't treat this aggressively, you could lose the foot. Or worse." Harold's face went pale. I didn't realize it was that bad. It just started as a little soreness a few weeks ago. Infections can progress rapidly, especially when we're not taking proper care of ourselves," Dr. Peterson said gently. "When did you last have a good meal? A full night's sleep?" Harold looked down at the photograph in his hands, and Anna saw his shoulders begin to shake. "I don't really remember. Nothing tastes right anymore. Nothing feels right." Anna pulled up a chair beside the exam table, her instincts telling her that this moment required more than just medical intervention. "Harold, can you tell us about the photograph? About Margaret?" For a long moment, Harold said nothing. Then, as if a dam had burst, the words began to pour out. "We took this picture on our honeymoon," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We drove to the coast, couldn't afford much of a trip, but Margaret said she didn't care as long as we were together. She was standing on the beach, and the wind kept blowing her hair around. She was laughing because I was trying to take her picture with this old camera that kept jamming up." Anna and Dr. Peterson listened as Harold's story unfolded 45 years, compressed into fragments of memory that tumbled out in no particular order. Margaret teaching school while Harold worked the farm. The miscarriages that broke their hearts before their children were finally born. The quiet evenings on the porch, Margaret reading while Harold planned the next day's work. "She handled her cancer better than I did," Harold admitted, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Never complained, never felt sorry for herself. Right up until the end, she was worried about me. Made me promise I'd take care of myself, stay connected with the kids and the neighbors. But I don't know how to do any of it without her." Anna reached out and touched Harold's arm gently. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was everything," Harold said simply. "And now she's gone, and I don't know how to be in the world without her. So I keep this picture close because it's the only way I can still feel her with me." "I know it sounds foolish." "It doesn't sound foolish at all," Anna interrupted. "It sounds like love." Dr. Peterson had been quietly observing this exchange, and now he leaned forward. "Harold, I'm going to be direct with you, because Margaret would want someone to look out for you the way you looked out for her. This infection could kill you if we don't act quickly, but treating it means we need your cooperation. You need to want to get better." Harold stared at the photograph, his thumb tracing Margaret's face through the worn surface. "Some days I'm not sure I do want to get better. Some days it feels like too much work just to get out of bed." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Harold's despair. Anna felt her heart break a little as she recognized the depth of his isolation, the way grief had convinced him that healing was a betrayal of his love for Margaret. "Harold," she said softly, "what do you think Margaret would say if she could see you now? If she knew you were risking your health, your life, because you missed her so much?" Harold's face crumpled. "She'd be furious with me. She always said I was too stubborn for my own good. She'd probably march me right down here herself and make sure I followed whatever treatment you prescribed. Then let's honor her by doing exactly that, Dr. Peterson said. We're going to start you on strong antibiotics right away, and I want to see you every day this week to monitor your progress. Anna will give you detailed instructions about wound care and what to watch for. Harold nodded slowly, but Anna could see the uncertainty in his eyes. She knew from experience that medical compliance was often about more than just following instructions. It was about believing that healing was worth the effort. That life still held possibilities worth preserving. Harold, she said, I want to share something with you. When Margaret was sick, she made me promise to check on you after she was gone. She was worried about exactly what's happening now, that you'd neglect yourself because you didn't know how to live without her. Harold looked up sharply. She asked you to watch over me? She loved you so much that she was planning for your care even while she was fighting for her own life, Anna said. She told me you'd probably resist help, that you'd try to handle everything alone. But she also told me that underneath all that stubbornness was a man worth saving, a man who still had love to give and life to live. Harold was quiet for a long time, studying Margaret's face in the photograph. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier. She always was smarter than me, saw things I couldn't see. She saw that you'd need support, and she made sure you'd have it, Anna continued. But Harold, you have to want to accept that support. You have to decide that Margaret's love for you includes wanting you to heal and find ways to be happy again. Dr. Peterson began writing out prescriptions while Anna gathered supplies for Harold's wound care. They worked with quiet efficiency, but Anna kept one eye on Harold, watching as he processed what they told him about Margaret's wishes. I've been so angry, Harold said suddenly. Not at Margaret, never at her, but at God, at the world, at everyone who got to keep their spouse. While mine was taken away, I've been angry at myself for not being able to save her, for not knowing how to go on without her. Anger is part of grief, Anna said gently, but so is healing. And healing doesn't mean forgetting Margaret or loving her less. It means honoring her by taking care of the life she treasured, your life. Harold carefully slipped the photograph into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. What if I don't remember how? What if I've forgotten how to live instead of just existing? Then we'll help you remember, Anna said. One day at a time, starting with taking care of this infection and taking care of yourself. Dr. Peterson handed Harold the prescriptions and a detailed care sheet. I'm serious about seeing you every day this week. Anna will be monitoring your progress, and I want you to call immediately if you notice any worsening of symptoms. Harold nodded, then looked directly at Anna. Margaret really asked you to look after me. She did, Anna confirmed. She said, you were the kind of man who'd give everything to everyone else, but wouldn't think to ask for help when you needed it. She wanted to make sure someone would be there to remind you that your life still matters, that you still matter. For the first time since entering the clinic, Harold's expression held something other than pain and despair. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was the possibility of hope, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, there was still a reason to fight for his health and his future. All right, he said quietly. All right, I'll do what you tell me to do. 4. Margaret. No, Harold, Anna said gently. Do it for yourself too. Margaret loved you, but she's gone. You're still here, and that means your story isn't finished yet. Harold stood slowly, favoring his infected foot but moving with more purpose than he'd shown in months. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to Anna one more time. Thank you, he said simply, for remembering her, for keeping your promise to her, for foreseeing me. Anna smiled, feeling the weight of Margaret's trust settling on her shoulders like a comfortable shawl. I'll see you tomorrow, Harold, and every day until you're better. As Harold limped out of the clinic, photographs safely tucked against his heart and prescriptions clutched in his weathered hands, Anna knew that this was just the beginning. The real work, helping Harold remember how to live again, was still ahead of them both. Harold's first night with the antibiotics was rough. He'd followed Anna's instructions carefully, taking the medication with food and applying the prescribed ointment to his infected foot, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself replaying the conversation at the clinic, hearing Anna's words about Margaret's final request echoing in his mind by morning. The pain in his foot had lessened slightly, enough for him to notice other discomforts he'd been ignoring. The empty refrigerator, the pile of unopened mail on the kitchen counter, the way his clothes hung loose on his diminished frame. Margaret would have been appalled at the state he'd let himself reach. When Anna arrived at his farmhouse that afternoon for his first follow-up visit, she found Harold sitting on the front porch, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt. The sight of him making even that small effort lifted her spirits considerably. "You look better already," she said, climbing the porch steps with her medical bag. "Feel a little better too," Harold admitted, though his voice still carried the weight of months of isolation. "The pain's not as sharp today." Anna settled into the chair beside him, the same chair where Margaret used to sit in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the cornfields gold. "That's a good sign. The antibiotics are working, but I want to check the wound and make sure we're staying ahead of the infection." As Anna examined his foot, she noticed Harold's hands weren't quite as steady as they'd been the day before. "Are you eating regularly? Taking the medication with food like we discussed?" Harold's face flushed slightly. "I've been trying. It's just I'm not much of a cook. Margaret always handled the meals." Anna looked up from her examination, recognizing the admission for what it was, not just a practical problem, but another way that grief had left Harold unable to care for himself. "What have you been eating?" "Mostly crackers and peanut butter. Sometimes I heat up a can of soup." The answer explained Harold's weight loss, and probably contributed to his body's inability to fight off the infection effectively. Anna finished bandaging his foot and sat back in her chair, considering her next words carefully. "Harold, I'd like to make a suggestion. What if I brought you some meals this week while you're recovering? Just until you're feeling stronger." Harold's jaw tightened with what Anna recognized as pride warring with need. "I don't want to be a burden." "You've got your own family to think about. It's not a burden," Anna said gently. "And besides, Margaret made me promise to look after you. That includes making sure you're properly nourished." At the mention of Margaret, Harold's resistance seemed to waver. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the overgrown garden where weeds had claimed the neat rows his wife had tended so carefully. "She would hate seeing it like this," he said, nodding toward the garden. "Every morning she'd be out there, before the dew dried, checking on her tomatoes, pulling weeds, talking to the plants like they were old friends." Anna followed his gaze, seeing past the current neglect to imagine what it must have been like when Margaret was alive, vibrant, with color and purpose, a reflection of the woman who'd cared for it. "Tell me about the garden," Anna said. "What did she grow?" Harold's face softened as he began to describe Margaret's gardening rituals, how she'd save seeds from year to year, the way she'd experiment with new varieties while keeping faithful to the old favorites, her pride in sharing the harvest with neighbors and friends. As he talked, Anna noticed something happening in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there since she'd known him. "Every fall, she'd make these huge batches of tomato sauce," Harold continued. "The whole house would smell like basil and garlic. For days, she'd give jars to everyone. The mailman, Dr. Peterson, that young couple who moved in down the road. Said food was meant to be shared." "She sounds like she knew how to build community," Anna observed. "Oh, she did," Harold said, a slight smile crossing his face for the first time Anna could remember. "Margaret never met a stranger. She'd invite people over for dinner who she'd just met at the grocery store. Our table was always set for more people than we'd planned on. Anna could picture it, the farmhouse filled with laughter and conversation, Margaret bustling around the kitchen, Harold quietly proud of his wife's gift for making people feel welcome. It painted a picture of a life rich with connection, which made Harold's current isolation even more poignant. "What's the hardest part?" Anna asked. "About being here without her?" Harold was quiet for so long that Anna wondered if he'd heard the question. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. The silence. This house was never quiet when Margaret was alive. She was always humming, or the radio was playing, or she was on the phone with one of the kids or playing something with the neighbors. Now it's so quiet, I can hear the clock ticking in the kitchen from anywhere in the house. Anna nodded, understanding. Silence can be its own kind of pain. Sometimes I find myself listening for her, Harold continued. For her footsteps in the morning or the sound of her putting the coffee on. I'll wake up and for just a second, I'll think she's still here. Then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. As Harold spoke, Anna noticed movement in the kitchen window, not a person, but something that caught the light. When she looked more closely, she realized it was a pair of ivory knitting needles, still holding what looked like an unfinished scarf in soft blue yarn. "Harold," she said gently, "there are knitting needles in the kitchen window. They look like they have a project on them." Harold followed her gaze, and his face crumpled slightly. She was making a scarf for our granddaughter Emma. Christmas present. She never got to finish it. Anna could see how the unfinished project had become another source of pain for Harold. A visible reminder of life interrupted, plans left incomplete. Margaret's knitting needles stood like sentries in the window, holding their burden of unfinished love. "Have you thought about finishing it?" Anna asked carefully. Harold shook his head immediately. "I don't know how to knit. Margaret tried to teach me once, but I was all thumbs. Besides, it wouldn't be the same coming from me." "Maybe not," Anna agreed. "But maybe it would be something else that's just as meaningful. Maybe it would be a way of completing something Margaret started, of making sure Emma has that piece of her grandmother's love." Harold looked at the knitting needles for a long time, and Anna could see him wrestling with the idea. She recognized the battle between honoring Margaret's memory by preserving everything exactly as she'd left it, and honoring her by continuing the acts of love she'd begun. "I wouldn't even know where to start," Harold said finally. "We could figure it out together," Anna offered. "I learned to knit from my grandmother. It might be nice to have a project, something to work on while you're recovering." Harold turned to look at Anna directly, and she saw something shifting in his expression. Not quite hope yet, but a loosening of the rigid grief that had held him frozen for months. "Margaret would like that," he said slowly. "She always said projects were better when they were shared." "Then let's share this one," Anna said. "But first, let's get you properly fed and make sure that infection continues to heal. Everything else can wait until you're stronger." Harold nodded, and for the first time since Margaret's death, he felt something that might have been the beginning of purpose stirring in his chest. Anna kept her promise about the meals, arriving each afternoon with containers of homemade soup, fresh bread, and simple dishes that Harold could easily reheat. She noticed he was beginning to eat more regularly, and the antibiotics were clearly working. The angry red streaks on his foot had faded, and the swelling was beginning to subside. On her fourth visit, she found Harold sitting at the kitchen table with Margaret's knitting needles in his hands, examining them with the careful attention he might once have given to a piece of farm equipment that needed repair. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her as she settled into the chair across from him, "about finishing Margaret's scarf. But I keep wondering, what would Emma think? Getting something that was supposed to be from her grandmother, but was actually finished by her grandfather?" Anna considered the question while she unwrapped the casserole she'd brought her mother's recipe for chicken and rice that was both nourishing and comforting. What kind of relationship did you have with Emma? Harold's face softened at the mention of his granddaughter. She's Sarah's oldest. 22 now, just graduated from college. Always been a special bond between us. When she was little, she'd spend summers here, helping Margaret in the garden and following me around the farm like a little shadow. When was the last time you talked to her? The question clearly made Harold uncomfortable. He set down the knitting needles and looked out the window toward Margaret's garden gloves, which still sat by the back door where she'd left them 8 months ago. Not since the funeral, he admitted. Sarah calls sometimes, leaves messages. Emma too, but I can't seem to find the words. What do you say to people when you feel like half of yourself is missing? Anna nodded, understanding. She'd seen this pattern many times in her work grief, creating a barrier between people precisely when they needed connection most. Have you listened to the messages? Harold shook his head. Can't bring myself to. The answering machine blinks at me every day, but hearing their voices when I can't give them anything back feels too hard. Anna stood and moved to the window, where Margaret's garden gloves waited, their worn leather darkened with years of soil and sunshine. She picked them up gently, feeling the way they'd been shaped by Margaret's hands. Harold, can you tell me about these gloves? He followed her gaze and sighed deeply. Margaret wore them every day from spring to fall. She'd put them on first thing in the morning and sometimes forget to take them off until evening. I used to tease her that she loved her garden more than she loved coming inside. They're still here, waiting, Anna observed. I can't move them, Harold said quietly. Moving them feels like admitting she's really not coming back. Anna understood the logic of grief, how the mind could make everyday objects into talismans against loss, but she also saw how Harold's inability to disturb Margaret's things was keeping him trapped in the past, unable to engage with the present or imagine a future. What if we thought about it differently? She suggested carefully. What if instead of moving them, we honored what they represent? Margaret loved growing things, nurturing life. Those gloves are a symbol of that love. Harold was quiet for a long moment, then surprised Anna by standing and walking to the back door. He picked up the gloves with reverent hands, holding them as if they still contained some essence of his wife. She had such gentle hands, he said, could coax life out of the most stubborn soil. These gloves went everywhere with her, not just the garden, but when she'd help neighbors with their yards, or when the church needed flower beds weeded. Tell me about the garden when it was thriving, Anna said. Settling back at the table, Harold returned to his chair, still holding the gloves. As he began to describe Margaret's garden, the careful layout of vegetables and flowers, the compost bins she'd tended like treasure chests, the way she'd save seeds and share cuttings with anyone who showed interest, Anna could see him coming, alive in a way she hadn't witnessed before. Every morning she'd make her rounds, Harold continued. Check each plant, talk to them like they were old friends. She swore they grew better when she talked to them. I used to watch her from the kitchen window, just amazed at how she could make anything grow. What would she say to them? Harold smiled for the first time in Anna's memory, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Oh, she'd comment on how well they were doing, scold the ones that weren't behaving, tell them about her plans for the day. Sometimes she'd sing to them. She had this terrible singing voice, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but those plants didn't seem to mind. Anna laughed, and the sound seemed to surprise Harold. When was the last time there had been laughter? In this house? She sounds like she understood that caring for growing things is about more than just watering and fertilizing, Anna said. She said gardening was like raising children, Harold replied. You had to pay attention, be patient, and believe that growth was always possible, even when you couldn't see it happening. Anna felt something shift in the conversation, a deeper understanding forming. Harold, Margaret's garden isn't growing anymore. But you're still here, still capable of growing and changing. Don't you think she'd want you to tend to your own growth the way she tended to her plants? Harold looked down at the gloves in his hands, then back at Anna. I called Sarah yesterday, he said quietly, after you left. Didn't talk to her, just listened to some of the messages she's left. How did that feel? Hard, but also I don't know, like maybe I was ready to hear her voice. She sounds worried about me. They all do. Emma left a message last week saying she wants to come visit, but she's afraid. I don't want to see anyone. Do you want to see her? Harold was quiet for a long time, turning the gloves over in his hands. Yes, he said finally. I think I do, but I'm scared too. Scared that seeing them will make me break down completely. Scared that I won't know how to be their grandfather without Margaret there to help me. Anna reached across the table and touched his arm gently. What if we worked on that fear? What if we started with something small, maybe returning one of their calls? Harold nodded slowly, then looked toward the knitting needles. And maybe we could work on Emma's scarf too. I think Margaret would want her to have it, even if the last part comes from my clumsy fingers instead of her graceful ones. I think that's exactly what Margaret would want, Anna agreed. And Harold? I think Emma would treasure it even more knowing that you cared enough to finish what her grandmother started. Harold stood and placed Margaret's gloves gently on the windowsill where they'd always lived. But somehow the gesture felt different, now not like a shrine to the past, but like a reminder of the nurturing love that could still grow, still flourish, even in the midst of loss. All right, he said, settling back down with the knitting needles. Teach me how to finish this scarf. And then maybe I'll call Emma and tell her she's welcome here anytime. Anna smiled, feeling the first real stirring of hope since she'd begun this journey with Harold. Let's start with the knitting. The phone calls can wait until you're feeling stronger. But as she began to show Harold the basic stitches, she could see something in his posture that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose. A reason to move forward that went beyond just surviving each day. 3 weeks into Harold's treatment, Anna arrived to find him sitting on the front porch with the completed scarf draped across his lap. His foot had healed remarkably well, and more importantly, it gained back some of the weight he'd lost during his months of neglect. But today something seemed different. His shoulders were slumped, and he was staring at the scarf with an expression of defeat. The last few rows are a mess, he said before Anna could even sit down. Look at this. He held up the end of the scarf, where his inexperienced stitches created an uneven, loose pattern that contrasted sharply with Margaret's precise work. Emma's going to take one look at this and know I ruined her grandmother's gift. Anna examined the scarf carefully. Harold was right that his stitches were different from Margaret's looser. Less uniform, but there was something touching about it. The contrast. The transition from Margaret's neat rows to Harold's more rustic ones told the story of love continued, of dedication overcoming inexperience. Harold, this is beautiful, Anna said, and she meant it. Look at what you've accomplished. You learned something completely new, something Margaret wanted to teach you for years, and you finished something she started out of love. Harold shook his head. I almost gave up yesterday. Dropped half the stitches and had to start that section. Over 3 times. Sat here wondering what I was thinking, trying to do something I'm no good at. Anna heard something in his voice that went beyond frustration with knitting, a deeper despair that seemed to have resurfaced despite his recent progress. She set down her medical bag and pulled her chair closer to his. What's really going on? Harold, this isn't just about the scarf. Harold was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently smoothing the soft blue yarn. I called Emma last night. First real conversation we've had since the funeral. How did it go? She cried, Harold said simply. The whole time. Kept asking if I was okay, telling me how worried everyone's been. And I felt like such a failure. Here's this young woman who just graduated college, starting her life, and instead of being proud and supportive, I've been this burden they all have to worry about. Anna recognized the guilt that often accompanied grief, the way loss could make people feel responsible for their own pain and the worry it caused others. What did you tell her? That I was getting better, that I missed her, that I was sorry for shutting everyone out. Harold's voice grew thick with emotion. She wants to come visit next weekend. Bring her mother with her. And I want to see them. I really do. But I'm terrified. Terrified of what? Harold set the scarf aside and leaned back in his chair, looking older than his 72 years. Of disappointing them. Of not being the grandfather Emma remembers. Of breaking down in front of them and making them feel like they have to take care of me. Anna nodded, understanding. She'd seen this pattern before. People emerging from deep grief often feared that their healing was fragile, that the presence of loved ones would either shatter their progress or reveal how much they'd changed. Harold, can I ask you something? When Emma was little and she'd visit here, what kind of grandfather were you? Harold's expression softened slightly. I don't know. I guess I was just myself. We'd work in the garden together. I'd teach her about the farm, let her help with simple chores. Margaret used to say I was patient with Emma in a way I'd never been with our own kids when they were small. And what made you good at being her grandfather then? I suppose I just loved her. Wanted to share things with her, show her how things worked, listen to her questions and stories. Anna smiled. And has that changed? Do you love her less now? No, Harold said immediately. If anything, I love her more. Losing Margaret made me realize how precious those connections are. Then you're still the same grandfather, Harold. You're just carrying more sorrow now. That doesn't make you less worthy of love or less capable of giving it. Harold picked up the scarf again, studying the place where Margaret's precise stitches gave way to his more uneven ones. I found something yesterday, he said quietly. When? I was looking for Margaret's old knitting books to help me figure out how to fix my mistakes. He stood and walked into the house, returning a moment later with a small wooden box that Anna hadn't seen before. His hand shook slightly as he opened it, revealing a bronze star medal nestled in faded blue velvet. Margaret kept this, Harold said. I'd forgotten I even had it. Got it in Vietnam for doing what needed to be done when things went bad. Margaret always said I should be proud of it, but I just wanted to forget that whole time. Anna looked at the medal, recognizing the weight of what Harold was sharing. What made you think of it yesterday? I was ready to give up on the scarf, feeling sorry for myself for being so clumsy with the knitting needles. Then I found this, and I remembered what Margaret used to say about it. She said it represented courage under pressure, the ability to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Harold closed the box gently. She used to tell me that's what she fell in love with, not some war hero, but a man who didn't quit when things got difficult. And yesterday, looking at this medal and this half-finished scarf, I realized I was about to quit on Emma, on my family, because I was afraid of being imperfect. Anna felt something shift in Harold as he spoke, a reconnection with strengths he'd forgotten he possessed. What did you decide? That maybe being Emma's grandfather doesn't mean being perfect. Maybe it means being brave enough to show up, even when you're grieving, even when you're different than you used to be. Harold sat back down and picked up the scarf, his fingers finding the loose stitches he'd been criticizing earlier. Margaret's part of this scarf is beautiful and perfect, like everything she did. My part is messier, but it's honest. It shows that I cared enough to try, even when I didn't know what I was doing. And that's a pretty good metaphor for love, isn't it? Anna observed. Sometimes perfect, sometimes messy, but always trying. Harold nodded, and Anna could see something settling in him, not the forced optimism of someone trying to convince themselves they were fine, but the quiet determination of someone who'd remembered what they were fighting for. "I'm going to give this scarf to Emma when she comes," Harold said, "and I'm going to tell her the story of how it was finished. How her grandmother started it with love, and how her grandfather finished it with love, and how sometimes that's enough." Anna smiled, feeling proud of Harold's progress and of Margaret's wisdom in ensuring he wouldn't face his grief alone. "I think that's exactly the right story to tell." Harold carefully folded the scarf, and Anna noticed how he held it, not with the frustration of earlier, but with the tenderness of someone cradling something precious. "You know what Margaret would say if she could see this?" "What's that?" "She'd say the imperfect parts make it more beautiful, not less. She always believed that the best things in life showed the marks of being handmade, being cared for by human hands." Anna nodded, watching Harold's face as he spoke about Margaret with warmth instead of just pain for the first time since she'd known him. This was progress, not the absence of grief, but the integration of love and loss into something he could carry forward. "She sounds like a wise woman," Anna said. "The wisest," Harold agreed. "And she'd want me to stop being afraid of disappointing people and start focusing on loving them the best way I know how." The morning of Emma's visit, Harold was up before dawn, moving through the farmhouse with a nervous energy Anna hadn't seen in him before. When she arrived for what had become their regular afternoon check-in, she found him in Margaret's old sewing room, standing before an open closet with a handful of dresses in his arms. "I don't know what to do with these," he said without preamble, his voice tight with emotion. "Emma will want to go through Margaret's things, maybe take something to remember her by. But I don't know how to decide what should stay and what should go." Anna set down the container of soup she'd brought and approached Harold carefully. The sewing room had clearly been Margaret's sanctuary, a bright space filled with fabric scraps, pattern books, and half-finished projects. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains onto a rocking chair where Margaret had probably spent countless hours creating beautiful things with her hands. "Have you been in here since she died?" Anna asked gently. Harold shook his head. Couldn't bear it. This was her favorite room in the house. She'd come in here when she needed to think, or when she was upset about something. I'd find her here late at night sometimes, just rocking and planning her next project. Anna noticed a particular dress. Harold was holding a simple blue sundress with tiny white flowers printed on the fabric. From the way he cradled it, she could tell it held special significance. "Tell me about that one," she said. Harold's fingers traced the pattern on the fabric. "She wore this to Emma's high school graduation. Said it was her lucky dress because she'd worn it to all the important family occasions, baptisms, graduations, birthdays. I always said it was her favorite because Grandma looked so pretty in it." Anna could see Harold wrestling with competing impulses, the desire to preserve everything exactly as Margaret had left it, and the recognition that sharing her belongings might be a way of sharing her memory with the people who loved her. "What do you think Margaret would want?" Anna asked. Harold was quiet for a long moment, still holding the blue dress. "She'd want Emma to have whatever would make her feel close to her grandmother. Margaret never cared much about things for their own sake. She cared about the memories attached to them, the love they represented." As Harold spoke, Anna noticed something tucked behind the sewing machine, a small leather journal with a ribbon marker protruding from its pages. She gestured toward it questioningly. "That's Margaret's project journal," Harold explained, following her gaze. "She kept track of everything she made, who it was for, what the occasion was. Said it helped her remember the stories behind each piece." Anna picked up the journal carefully, feeling the weight of all the memories contained within its pages. "Harold, would you mind if I looked at this? It might help us figure out what Emma would treasure most." Harold nodded, and Anna opened the journal to find page after page of Margaret's careful handwriting. Each entry described a project: scarves for the church auction, quilts for new babies, dresses for special occasions. But what struck Anna most was how Margaret wrote about the people she was creating for, the love and intention behind every stitch. "Listen to this," Anna said, reading from an entry dated 2 years earlier. "Emma's graduation dress chose the blue fabric because it matches her eyes, just like her grandfather's. She's becoming such a beautiful young woman, inside and out. Harold says she reminds him of me at that age, but I think she has a strength all her own. I want her to feel special on graduation day, to know how proud we are of the woman she's becoming." Harold's eyes filled with tears as Anna read Margaret's words. She always saw the best in everyone, especially Emma. Those two had such a special bond. Anna continued reading, finding entries about gifts Margaret had made for each family member, each one filled with specific observations about their personalities, their needs, their dreams. It was like reading a love letter to her entire family, written in fabric and thread instead of words. "Harold, look at this," Anna said, pointing to an entry near the back of the journal. "It's dated just a few weeks before Margaret got sick." Harold leaned closer as Anna read. "Harold's been having those nightmares again, the ones from Vietnam. He tries to hide it, but I can tell when he hasn't slept well. I'm making him a lap blanket for his chair-soft blue wool that matches his favorite shirt. I want him to have something comforting to wrap around himself when the memories get too heavy. If something happens to me, I hope he'll remember that love doesn't end just because life does." Harold's breath caught as he heard his wife's words, her final expression of care for him written in her careful script. Anna could see the impact of discovering that Margaret had been thinking about his comfort and well-being, even while facing her own mortality. "She made you a blanket?" Anna asked. Softly, Harold nodded toward a cedar chest in the corner of the room. "It's in there. I found it after the funeral, wrapped in tissue paper with a note. But I wasn't ready to use it." Anna walked to the chest and lifted the lid carefully. Inside, wrapped in white tissue paper, was the most beautiful blanket she'd ever seen: soft blue wool, knitted in an intricate pattern that must have taken months to complete. Tucked beneath it was an envelope with Harold's name written in Margaret's handwriting. "Have you read the note?" Anna asked. "No," Harold admitted. "I was afraid of what it might say. Afraid it would be too much like goodbye." Anna understood Harold's fear, but she also recognized that this might be exactly what he needed, not just Margaret's final goodbye, but her permission to live without her. She held out the envelope. "Maybe it's time," she said gently. Harold took the envelope with shaking hands and opened it slowly. As he read the single page inside, tears began streaming down his face. When he finished, he handed the letter to Anna in Margaret's familiar handwriting. She read, "My dearest Harold, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're struggling with how to go on without me. I know you, my stubborn, wonderful man. You'll try to carry all your grief alone, just like you tried to carry all your war memories alone until I convinced you to share them with me. But grief shared is grief lessened, and love shared is love multiplied. Use this blanket when you need comfort, but don't use it to hide from the world. You have so much love left to give, so many people who need the strength and kindness that made me fall in love with you 50 years ago. Live for both of us, Harold. Love for both of us. Our story isn't over. You're just writing the next chapter. Without me. Make it a good one. All my love, always, Margaret." Harold sank into Margaret's rocking chair, clutching the letter to his chest. Anna knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder as he wept. Not the hopeless tears of early grief, but the cleansing tears of someone finally ready to receive the gift his wife had tried to give him. "She knew," Harold whispered. "She knew exactly what I'd need to hear." Anna nodded, thinking of the wisdom and love contained in that simple letter. She knew you better than anyone, and she trusted you to find your way back to living, even without her guidance. Harold carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then he stood and walked to the closet, pulling out the blue sundress with new determination. Emma should have this, he said, and the journal too. She should know how much her grandmother loved her, how proud Margaret was of the woman she was becoming. Anna smiled, seeing Harold's transformation continue. What about the blanket? Harold looked at the soft blue wool, and for the first time since Margaret's death, he reached for something of hers with anticipation rather than dread. I think it's time I started using it, he said. Margaret made it for me, and she wanted me to be comforted. Fighting that comfort isn't honoring her memory, it's dishonoring her final gift. As Harold held the blanket against his chest, Anna could see him finally beginning to understand what Margaret had tried to tell him, that love didn't end with death, but transformed into something that could sustain and guide the living toward hope. Emma arrived on Saturday morning with her mother Sarah, and Harold felt his heart swell at the sight of his granddaughter stepping out of the car. At 22, she had grown into a beautiful young woman with Margaret's gentle eyes and Harold's determined chin. She ran up the porch steps and threw her arms around him with the same enthusiasm she'd shown as a child. "Grandpa," she whispered against his shoulder, and Harold felt something inside him settle into place. Sarah followed more slowly, her face showing the worry and relief warring in her expression. Harold hadn't seen his daughter since the funeral, and he could see how much his withdrawal had cost her. She looked older, more fragile, as if she'd been carrying the weight of concern for him along with her own grief for Margaret. "Dad," Sarah said simply, and Harold opened his other arm to include her in the embrace. They spent the morning catching up, sitting on the porch where Harold had done so much of his healing over the past few weeks. Emma told him about her new job at a nonprofit, her apartment in the city, her plans for graduate school. Sarah shared updates about her husband and younger son, carefully skirting around the months of unanswered phone calls and the worry that had kept her awake at night. When Anna arrived for her usual visit, Harold introduced her with genuine warmth as the nurse who saved my life. Anna could see immediately how much lighter Harold seemed in the presence of his family, how their love was calling forth the grandfather Emma remembered. "I have something for you," Harold told Emma after Anna had checked his foot and pronounced him fully healed. He disappeared into the house and returned with the completed scarf, wrapped in tissue paper. Emma's face lit up as she unwrapped it, but Harold watched carefully as she noticed the change in stitching patterns about 2/3 of the way through. "Grandma started this," Harold explained nervously. "It was supposed to be your Christmas present, but when she got sick, she couldn't finish it. So Anna taught me how to knit, and I completed it. I know my part isn't as good as hers." But Emma silenced him by throwing her arms around his neck again, tears streaming down her face. "Grandpa, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. It's like having both of you with me." Harold felt his own tears threatening as Emma wrapped a scarf around her shoulders, running her fingers over both Margaret's precise stitches and his more rustic ones. "You can tell where one of us left off and the other picked up," he said. "That makes it perfect," Emma said firmly. "It tells the whole story." Anna excused herself to give the family privacy, but as she was packing up her medical supplies, Sarah followed her into the kitchen. "I need to thank you," Sarah said quietly, "and I need to tell you something." Anna looked up from her bag, surprised by the serious tone in Sarah's voice. "Mom asked me to give you this," Sarah continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. "She wrote it just before she died, when she was still lucid. She made me promise to give it to you after Dad was better, not before, because she didn't want you to feel obligated, but after you'd already chosen to help him." Anna took the envelope with confusion. Her name was written on the front in Margaret's familiar handwriting, but below it was a line that made her breath catch. For Anna, who will understand the weight of promises. With Sarah watching, Anna opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with Margaret's careful script. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've already been caring for Harold, and he's well enough for Sarah to give you this letter. I want you to know that I didn't ask you to watch over him lightly. I chose you not just because you're a wonderful nurse, but because I recognized something in you during our conversations, a woman who understands what it means to carry love forward when the person you're caring for can't care for themselves. I know about your husband, Anna. I know about the car accident 3 years ago and how you moved to Millfield afterward to start over. I saw the way you cared for me with the tenderness of someone who knows what it's like to lose the person you thought you'd spend your life with. You never told me your story, but I could see it in the way you held my hand during the difficult treatments, the way you made sure Harold had a chair beside my bed, even when the room was crowded. I'm asking you to care for Harold because I believe you'll understand something that others might not, that sometimes healing isn't about getting over loss, but about learning to carry love forward in new ways. Harold will need someone who knows that grief isn't a problem to be solved, but a love that needs to be honored and transformed. But Anna, I'm also asking you to let Harold care for you in return. You've been alone too long, carrying your own grief in isolation just like Harold will try to do. You both need to remember that healing happens in relationship, that we're not meant to carry our sorrows alone. I'm not trying to orchestrate anything beyond friendship. That would be presumptuous of me. But I am hoping that in caring for each other, you'll both find your way back to believing that love doesn't end with loss. It just takes new forms. Thank you for the gift you gave me during my illness. The gift of knowing that Harold wouldn't be alone. Take care of each other, Margaret. Anna's hands were shaking as she finished reading. She looked up to find Sarah watching her with understanding in her eyes. You knew about this? Anna asked. Sarah nodded. Mom told me about your husband, about why you moved here. She said you reminded her of herself when she was younger, strong, caring, but afraid to let anyone take care of you in return. Anna felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. For 3 years, she'd focused entirely on caring for others, building her life around work and her son Miguel, never allowing herself to acknowledge how lonely she'd been, how much she'd missed having someone who truly saw her. I had no idea. She knew, Anna whispered. Mom was like that, Sarah said gently. She saw people, really saw them. And she worried about you almost as much as she worried about Dad. She used to say that healers often forget to heal themselves. From the porch came the sound of Emma's laughter mixed with Harold's deeper chuckle, and Anna felt something shift inside her chest. For weeks, she'd thought she was simply fulfilling a promise to a dying woman. Now she realized Margaret had orchestrated something far more complex, not just Harold's healing, but her own. I don't know what to do with this, Anna admitted. Sarah smiled. Maybe you don't have to do anything except let it be what it is. Dad's been healing because of your care. But Anna, you've been healing too. Mom saw that possibility before either of you did. Anna walked to the kitchen window and looked out at Harold and Emma, seeing them with new eyes. Harold was showing his granddaughter Margaret's garden gloves, explaining how her grandmother had used them to coax life from the soil. Anna was listening with rapt attention, and Anna could see how Harold was coming alive in the role of storyteller, keeper of Margaret's memory. When Harold glanced toward the window and smiled at her, Anna felt her heart do something it hadn't done in 3 years, open with the possibility of connection that went beyond duty or compassion. She'd been so focused on helping Harold remember how to live that she hadn't noticed she was remembering too. She planned this whole thing, Anna said, half in wonder, half in disbelief. Mom was strategic about love, Sarah agreed. She believed people needed each other, and she wasn't above giving them gentle pushes in the right direction. Anna folded Margaret's letter carefully, feeling the weight of the woman's final gift settling over her. Margaret hadn't just ensured that Harold would have care during his darkest time. She'd created the possibility for two grieving people to find their way back to hope together. Harold appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face bright with the joy of reconnecting with Emma. "Everything all right in here?" Anna met his eyes, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, not just as a patient or a promise to keep, but as a man who'd shown her that healing was possible, that love could survive loss and grow into something new. "Everything's perfect," she said, and meant it in ways that surprised her. Margaret had orchestrated their meeting, but what had grown between them was entirely their own, fragile and unexpected, but real enough to build a future on. In the days following Emma's visit, Harold found himself processing Margaret's letter to Anna with a mixture of amazement and something that felt almost like betrayal. Had his growing friendship with Anna been genuine, or simply the result of his wife's careful orchestration? The question haunted him as he sat in his kitchen each morning, Margaret's lap blanket wrapped around his shoulders, trying to understand the complexity of what his wife had arranged. Anna, for her part, had been equally unsettled by Margaret's revelation. She'd taken a few days off from her regular visits, telling Harold she needed time to think. But her absence only emphasized how much her presence had come to mean to him, how their conversations had become the anchor point of his days. On Thursday morning, Harold made a decision. He walked to the old cedar chest in Margaret's sewing room and carefully lifted out their wedding album, a thick book bound in white leather that he hadn't opened since the funeral. His hands trembled as he carried it to the kitchen table, but he forced himself to open the cover. The first photograph showed Margaret at 26, radiant in her simple wedding dress, her eyes bright with joy and possibility. Harold traced her face with one finger, remembering how nervous he'd been that day, how certain he was that he was the luckiest man alive to be marrying someone so far out of his league. As he turned the pages, Harold began to see his marriage with new clarity. Margaret had always been strategic about love, not manipulative, but thoughtful about how to nurture the relationships she cared about. She'd orchestrated their first date by asking him to help her move some furniture, knowing he was too shy to ask her out directly. She'd planned their proposal by leaving hints about her favorite restaurant until he finally took her there and found the courage to ask her to marry him. "You always were smarter than me," Harold said aloud to Margaret's picture. "You just saw possibilities I was too scared to imagine." He was still sitting with the album when Anna knocked on his door. Harold felt his heart rate increase as he let her in, uncertain what her time away had helped her decide about Margaret's machinations. "I've been thinking about what Margaret wrote," Anna said without preamble, settling into her usual chair at the kitchen table. She noticed the wedding album immediately. "Those are beautiful pictures." "Anna, I need to ask you something," Harold said, closing the album gently. "Have I been a project for you? Something you felt obligated to do because of Margaret's letter?" Anna was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "When I first started coming here, yes, it was about the promise I made to Margaret. But Harold, that changed weeks ago. Somewhere between teaching you to knit and listening to your stories about the farm, this became about friendship, about caring for someone whose company I genuinely enjoy." Harold felt relief wash over him. "I was worried that everything between us was just Margaret pulling strings from beyond the grave." "Margaret may have brought us together," Anna said, "but what's grown between us is ours. She couldn't orchestrate genuine caring, or the way you make me laugh when you grumble about my cooking, or how safe I feel talking to you about things I haven't told anyone else." Anna paused, then continued more softly. "Harold, Margaret's letter made me realize something. For 3 years, I've been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I forgot how to let anyone take care of me. But you've been doing that without either of us realizing it, checking on me when I seemed tired, asking about Miguel, making sure I eat something when I bring you dinner." Harold looked at Anna with surprise. "I have?" "You have," Anna confirmed with a smile. "And it's been healing. For me in ways I didn't expect." Margaret was right, that we both needed to remember that caring for others works best when it goes both directions. Harold opened the wedding album again, stopping at a picture of him and Margaret dancing at their reception. Margaret's head was thrown back in laughter, and Harold was looking at her with complete adoration. "She was always thinking 3 steps ahead," Harold said. "I used to tease her that she could have been a general, the way she could see how things might work out before anyone else could imagine it. What do you think she saw when she looked at us?" Anna asked. Harold considered the question seriously. "I think she saw 2 people who'd forgotten how to hope, who let loss convince them that caring about someone new was a betrayal of the love they'd lost." Anna nodded. "And she trusted us to figure out that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies." Harold turned to a photo near the end of the album. Margaret in the hospital during her final weeks, still managing to smile despite her illness. "She told me once that she wasn't afraid of dying, but she was afraid of leaving me alone with all the love we built together and no one to share it with." "Maybe that's what she saw in us," Anna said gently. 2 people with a lot of love to give, who just needed to remember that it was safe to give it. Harold closed the album and looked directly at Anna. "I want to do something to honor Margaret properly. Not just keep her memory alive, but celebrate what she gave us, her final gift of bringing us together. What did you have in mind?" Harold stood and walked to the window overlooking Margaret's neglected garden. "I want to restore her garden, but not just restore it, expand it. Make it into something that feeds people, brings the community together the way Margaret always did." Anna joined him at the window, seeing the overgrown beds with new possibilities. "That sounds like exactly what Margaret would want. I can't do it alone," Harold continued. "My foot is healed, but I'm still learning how to be in the world again. I need someone who understands what this means to me." Anna felt her heart flutter as she recognized the invitation in Harold's words. Not just to help with the garden, but to be part of something larger, a partnership built on mutual care and shared purpose. "I'd love to help," she said. "But Harold, I need you to know something. My feelings about this friendship, about you, and not just gratitude or obligation, they're real." Harold turned to face her fully. "Mine too, and that scares me a little." "Why?" "Because caring about you feels like taking a risk I haven't taken in 3 years. What if I'm not ready? What if I disappoint you the way I disappointed my family by shutting them out?" Anna reached out and touched Harold's arm gently. "Harold, you're not the same man who shut his family out. You've learned how to let people care for you, how to accept help, how to share your grief instead of carrying it alone. That's not moving backward, that's growth." Harold nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words settling into his bones. Margaret always said that the best things in life required courage. I think she knew that bringing us together would require both of us to be brave enough to care again. "Are you ready to be that brave?" Anna asked. Harold looked out at Margaret's garden one more time, then back at Anna's expectant face. "With your help, I think I am." Anna smiled, feeling something click into place between them, not romance exactly, but the foundation for whatever their relationship might become. "Then let's start planning our garden. Something tells me Margaret would love to see her tomatoes growing again." Harold reached for Margaret's lap blanket and wrapped it around both their shoulders as they stood together at the window, planning something beautiful from the ashes of loss. For the first time since Margaret's death, Harold felt like he was moving towards something instead of just surviving each day. "You know what the best part of this is?" Harold said. "What's that?" "Margaret would be so smug about being right," Harold said with a chuckle. She always did love it when her plans worked out exactly as she'd hoped. Anna laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen with warmth that had been missing for too long. Outside, the winter light was beginning to fade, but inside, something new was beginning to bloom. The first warm Saturday in March found Harold and Anna kneeling side by side in Margaret's garden, their hands dark with rich soil as they prepared the beds for spring planting. Harold had spent the week clearing away the weeds and dead growth. Of the past 8 months, each handful of debris representing another step away from the paralysis that had held him captive for so long. Anna had arrived early that morning with seedlings. She'd started in her own kitchen tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that would form the foundation of their expanded garden. But more importantly, she'd brought something else, a small granite stone, roughly the size of a dinner plate, with Margaret's name and dates engraved in simple, elegant script. "I had this made," Anna said, showing Harold the memorial stone. "I thought we could place it somewhere central in the garden, so Margaret's presence would always be part of what grows here." Harold took the stone in his weathered hands, running his fingers over his wife's name. For a moment, Anna worried she'd overstepped, that the gesture might send Harold back into the dark place he'd fought so hard to escape. But when he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears of gratitude, not grief. "It's perfect," he said simply. She'd love knowing she's still part of the garden. Together, they chose a spot near the center of the largest bed, where the morning sun would warm the stone and the evening light would make Margaret's name glow softly. As Harold settled the memorial into the earth, he found himself speaking to Margaret as naturally as if she were kneeling beside them. "We're making your garden bigger, sweetheart," he said softly. "Anna thinks we should plant enough to share with the whole neighborhood, the way you always wanted to. Tom Henderson's already asked if he can help with the watering system." Anna continued working around them, giving Harold the space to have this conversation with his wife while staying close enough to provide support if he needed it. She watched as Harold's movements became more fluid, more confident, as if the act of working the soil was reconnecting him with parts of himself that had been dormant. "You know what Margaret would say if she could see us now?" Harold asked, looking up from where he was planting the first tomato seedling. "What's that?" "She'd say we were taking too long to get the seeds in the ground," Harold chuckled. "She always said the earth was ready for planting before the gardeners were ready to plant." Anna smiled, imagining Margaret bustling around the garden with characteristic efficiency, probably offering gentle criticism of their technique while simultaneously praising their efforts. "She sounds like she didn't believe in wasting daylight." "Never," Harold agreed. "She used to say that every day the ground was ready and we weren't planting was a day of lost growing time, lost possibility." As they worked, Harold began sharing more memories of Margaret's gardening rituals, how she'd talk to each plant as she set it in the soil, the way she'd arranged the vegetables and flowers so that colors and textures complemented each other, her habit of saving the best seeds from each year's harvest to ensure the garden's continuation. She planned for the future even in her gardening, Harold realized aloud, always thinking about next year's plants, next year's harvest. Anna paused in her planting, recognizing the deeper significance of Harold's observation. Maybe that's what she was doing with us too, planting seeds for a future she wouldn't see but trusted would grow. Harold nodded, understanding flooding his face. She wasn't trying to replace herself in my life. She was trying to ensure that love would continue growing here after she was gone. The realization hit Harold with unexpected force, not the sharp pain of grief he'd grown accustomed to, but a warm swell of gratitude for Margaret's foresight and faith in his capacity for healing. She'd trusted him to find his way back to caring for growing things, both in the garden and in his relationships with other people. As if summoned by their conversation, Tom Henderson appeared at the garden gate, carrying a basket of hand tools and wearing the hesitant smile of someone hoping to be welcomed. "Thought you might could use some help," Tom called out. "Linda's got a whole tray of pepper plants she started from seed. Says Margaret always admired her Galapagos." Harold looked up from the memorial stone, and for a moment Anna held her breath, uncertain whether Harold was ready to expand their intimate work session into a community gathering. But then Harold's face broke into the warmest smile she'd seen from him yet. "Come on in, Tom," Harold called back. "We've got plenty of room for more hands and more plants." As Tom approached the garden beds, Anna could see Harold transforming before her eyes, not back into who he'd been before Margaret's death, but into someone new. Someone who could hold grief and joy simultaneously, who could honor the past while embracing the future. "Margaret would love this," Harold said quietly to Anna as Tom knelt beside them and began examining their planting progress with the eye of an experienced gardener. "She would," Anna agreed. "And Harold? I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming." Harold looked around the garden, at the memorial stone marking Margaret's presence, at the new plants representing hope and growth, at the friends who'd chosen to join him in this work of restoration, and felt something he hadn't experienced in almost a year: pure, uncomplicated happiness. By the end of the day, what had started as a quiet morning of planting had transformed into an impromptu community gathering. Linda Henderson had arrived with her promised pepper plants and stayed to help design the layout of the herb section. Dr. Peterson had stopped by during his evening walk and ended up contributing medical wisdom about which plants might be useful for natural remedies. Even young Miguel, Anna's 15-year-old son, had appeared after school and was now earnestly asking Harold about crop rotation while they worked on expanding the garden borders. Harold found himself in the unexpected role of host and coordinator, drawing on reserves of social energy he'd forgotten he possessed. But more importantly, he discovered something profound. Helping others connect with the garden felt as natural as breathing, as if Margaret's gift for bringing people together had somehow transferred to him through the soil itself. "Mr. Thompson," Miguel said, pausing in his digging to wipe sweat from his forehead, "my mom says you used to be in the army. Were you ever scared?" Anna started to redirect her son's question, but Harold raised a gentle hand to stop her. He'd been thinking about his Bronze Star lately, about the courage it represented, and how that same courage was needed now for the work of rebuilding his life. "I was scared plenty of times," Harold told Miguel honestly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what needs to be done even when you are afraid." "What needed to be done today?" Miguel asked with the directness of youth. Harold looked around the garden, taking in the newly planted beds. The memorial stone settled among the sprouting seedlings, the neighbors who'd become friends working together in the fading light. Today, what needed to be done was choosing to grow something new instead of just protecting what was already gone. Anna felt her heart swell with pride as she watched Harold mentoring her son, seeing the natural teacher and guide he'd always been Bud had temporarily lost during his months of grief. This was the man Margaret had fallen in love with, the grandfather Emma adored, the neighbor people instinctively trusted with their stories and their struggles. "Harold," Dr. Peterson called from where he was examining the herb section. "You." "No. We've been talking at the clinic about starting a community wellness program. Garden therapy, cooking classes using fresh herbs, that sort of thing. Would you be interested in being involved?" Harold paused in his planting, considering the invitation. 6 months ago, the idea of taking on any new responsibility would have felt overwhelming. Now, surrounded by the evidence of what he could accomplish when he allowed others to support him, it felt like a natural next step. "What would that involve?" Harold asked. "Nothing too formal at first," Dr. Peterson explained. "Maybe teaching people about growing healing herbs, sharing Margaret's recipes for using fresh ingredients, helping other folks who might be struggling with loss or isolation to find their way back to caring for growing things." Anna watched Harold's face as he processed the suggestion, seeing the moment when possibility crystallized into purpose. This was what Margaret had envisioned, not just Harold's personal healing, but his transformation into someone who could guide others through their own difficult journeys. "I'd like that," Harold said slowly. "Margaret always said knowledge was meant to be shared, and I've learned a few things lately about what it takes to start growing again after everything seems dead." As the evening light began to fade, the impromptu work party started winding down. People began gathering their tools and making plans to return the following weekend to continue the expansion. But before anyone left, Harold stood and called for their attention. "I want to thank you all for today," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. "A year ago, I thought my story was over. I thought the best parts of my life were behind me, buried with my wife. But today, standing here with all of you, I realize that Margaret's story isn't over either. It's continuing through this garden, through the connections we're making, through the life we're choosing to nurture together." Harold reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small address book new, with a red leather cover that caught the last rays of sunlight. Margaret always kept track of everyone she cared about in a little book like this. "I'm starting my own now, because I've learned that staying connected with people isn't just nice, it's necessary. It's how we keep love alive." Anna felt tears threatening as she watched Harold carefully write down phone numbers and addresses from each person who joined them in the garden work. This was the final piece of his transformation, from someone who'd isolated himself in grief to someone actively building and maintaining community. "Miguel," Harold said, turning to Anna's son, "I want you to be my first official entry. You've got good instincts about plants, and I think Margaret would have liked having you around to ask questions and keep us all honest." Miguel beamed with pride as Harold wrote his name and phone number in the new address book, and Anna felt her own healing journey completing another circle. Her son needed male role models, needed to see what strength and gentleness could look like in the same person. Margaret had orchestrated Harold's healing, but Harold was now extending that healing to Anna's family without being asked as everyone finally headed home. Harold stood alone in the garden for a moment, address book in hand, surrounded by the promise of new growth. He wasn't the same man who'd sat on this porch 8 months ago, consumed by grief and unable to imagine a future. He was someone who carried Margaret's love forward by sharing it with others. 6 months later, Harold stood in his flourishing garden on a crisp October morning, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes. The memorial stone bearing Margaret's name was now surrounded by a riot of color-late blooming flowers that Anna had suggested planting to extend the beauty well into fall. The garden had become exactly what Margaret would have wanted, a gathering place that fed both bodies and souls. Anna approached from the farmhouse kitchen, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee and the morning mail. Their routine had evolved naturally. Over the months, she still made her regular visits, but now they were less about medical care and more about shared friendship. Harold had become a fixture at the clinic's wellness program, leading workshops on container gardening for people living in apartments and teaching grief support groups how to find healing through nurturing growing things. "Letter from Emma," Anna said, handing Harold an envelope along with his coffee. Harold's face lit up as he recognized his granddaughter's handwriting. Emma had visited 3 times since that first healing weekend, each visit revealing more of the strong, compassionate young woman she'd become. The scarf Harold had finished for her had become her treasured possession. She wore it in the author photo for the article she'd written about intergenerational healing for her nonprofit's newsletter. "She's bringing someone to Thanksgiving," Harold said after reading the letter. "Says there's a young man she wants me to meet." Anna smiled, watching Harold's expression. A year ago, the thought of his granddaughter's romantic life would have sent him spiraling into memories of Margaret and worries about being an inadequate guardian of family wisdom. Now, He looked genuinely delighted at the prospect of meeting someone important to Emma. "Are you ready for that?" Anna asked. "I think so," Harold said, surprising himself with the confidence in his voice. "Emma's got good judgment. If she cares about someone enough to bring him home, then I want to know him too." As they walked through the garden together, Harold pointed out the various sections that had evolved over the growing season. The original vegetables that he and Margaret had always grown were thriving, but they were now joined by experimental plots suggested by community members. A section of herbs from Linda Henderson's family recipes, flowers specifically chosen to attract butterflies as requested by the local elementary school class that had adopted the garden as their outdoor classroom, and a small greenhouse that Dr. Peterson had helped fund for year-round growing. "Tom's bringing his grandson over this afternoon to help with the winter preparations," Harold said, checking the health of the late-season spinach. "That boy's got real potential as a gardener. Reminds me of myself at that age, more enthusiasm than knowledge, but willing to learn." Anna marveled at how naturally Harold had stepped into the role of mentor and teacher. His patient way with children and struggling adults had made him the unofficial community counselor for anyone dealing with loss or major life transitions. People sought him out not just for gardening advice, but for his hard-won wisdom about how to keep moving forward when everything felt broken. They paused at Margaret's memorial stone, which Harold had made a habit of visiting each morning. Today, instead of the solitary grief ritual it had once been, he was accompanied by Anna and carrying news to share with his wife. "Margaret, the Hendersons are talking about expanding their own garden next spring," Harold said, settling easily into the conversation with his deceased wife that had become part of his daily routine. "And Anna's Miguel is starting to show real interest in plant biology. I think you'd be proud of how much life is growing from the seeds you planted." Anna had grown comfortable with these one-sided conversations, understanding that they represented Harold's healthy integration of past and present, rather than an inability to let go. Margaret remained a presence in Harold's life, but no longer as a source of paralyzing grief, instead, as a continued source of guidance and inspiration. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Miguel appeared around the corner of the farmhouse, having walked over from Anna's house after finishing his morning chores. At 16 now, he'd grown several inches and had developed the confident bearing of a young man who knew he was valued and trusted. "Mr. Harold," Miguel called, "I've got those seed catalogs you wanted to look at. Mom says you're planning something big for next year." Harold and Anna exchanged a look filled with shared excitement. They'd been developing plans for a community garden program that would provide fresh vegetables for the local food bank while teaching gardening skills to anyone who wanted to learn. It was ambitious and would require significant community support, but Harold had learned that ambitious dreams were often the most worth pursuing. "We're thinking about expanding beyond just this garden," Harold explained to Miguel. "Creating spaces where people can grow their own food and learn from each other. What do you think?" Miguel's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I think Grandma Margaret would love that idea." Harold felt his heart warm at Miguel's casual reference to Margaret. Somehow, without anyone planning it, Anna's son had begun thinking of Margaret as an honorary grandmother, keeping her memory alive in the most natural way possible by continuing the work she'd started and embracing the values she'd lived by. Later that evening, as Anna prepared to head home and Miguel ran ahead to start his homework, Harold found himself alone in the garden once more. But this solitude felt completely different from the isolation that had nearly destroyed him a year ago. He was alone by choice now, taking a moment to appreciate the fullness of his days before returning to a house that was once again filled with purpose and connection. He pulled Margaret's final card from his shirt pocket, not the photograph that had once been pressed against his infected foot, but a thank you note she'd written but never sent, found by Sarah among her mother's papers and given to Harold just last week. In Margaret's familiar handwriting, it read, "To my dearest Harold, thank you for a lifetime of love, for being the kind of man who makes love grow wherever he goes. I'm not worried about you anymore, because I know that the love we built together will keep growing long after I'm gone. You are my greatest adventure, and loving you was my greatest joy. Keep spreading that love around. The world needs what you have to give." Harold folded the card carefully and placed it back in his pocket, next to his heart where Margaret's love would always live. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share the wisdom he'd gained through surviving loss and choosing hope. Tonight, surrounded by the evidence of life renewed and love multiplied, Harold Thompson was exactly where he was meant to be. The garden slept peacefully around Margaret's memorial stone, and in the quiet farmhouse, Harold slept peacefully, too no longer haunted by nightmares of loss, but sustained by dreams of all the growth still to come.